Right. Having covered briefly what Unit 2 is going to be about, now we're going to transition to Unit 3. Unit 3 is on the topic of effective intercultural communication and perspectives. The purpose of this unit is to develop your understanding of the importance of managing intercultural communication and perspectives that help to determine educational policy applicable to national and international context. So here we are going to be talking about different cultures and how that is impacting the creation of policy, the implementation of policy, not only within your own country of residence, but also considering international contexts as well. We are going to look into the impact of globalization and how that affects communication. This is quite important, and if you are currently based in the UK, you might be familiar with some of the key legislation that has been introduced by the government on the topic of diversity and inclusion, and how that has set the tone of how communication takes place at schools and also in a professional context when it comes to certain topics and when it comes to certain ways of working as well. If you have completed level 6, level 5, you would have already learned more about the Equality Act, where there are quite a few protected characteristics. And when I say protected characteristics, they are put in place so that people are not discriminated at the workplace depending on where they come from, their nationality, their culture. So this is something which we're going to again briefly cover at this level, but that is what some of all companies actually have adopted as a policy, as practice, in order to ensure that communication is smooth, given that we have a globalized workforce. Many of the companies here have more of a globalized workplace, and again with the introduction of technology, very and how things unfolded with the pandemic, a lot of employees were let to work from home and in their own countries. So we are going to be talking about the key policies that have allowed this transition to happen, and also how governments have facilitated the smooth transition in terms of what they have introduced and how that impacts our role as managers and education practitioners. We're also going to be talking about the global connectivity and managing communication and all those expectations that are involved. And to give you an example, you might be familiar with the platform Slack, which a lot of teams are using on an international level in order to communicate with their team members, with their peers. You may already be using Slack. It's an application in your own company at the moment. And when we talk about global connectivity and managing communication expectation, here is when you are embracing the necessity of urgently reacting, resolving problems, let's say resolving inquiries of some of your learners, because you are so connected that with the click of a button you've got the opportunity to respond and to deal with certain pressing issues, for instance. However, the downside of that quick and global connectivity is about managing expectations, setting the right expectations in place with your team, with the learners that you're supporting. And that is quite important to be discussed, because it's something that is happening in real life, and as a manager, as an education practitioner, you will be faced with the importance of setting expectations and managing that two-way communication so that it runs smoothly, so that you are taking into consideration the different cultures, global legislation, and things like that. And this is what Unit 3 is pretty much all about. And of course, Again, we're going to be talking about taking cultural differences into account when we're dealing with a diverse group of people, and once again talking about global connectivity and how certain things could be misinterpreted. How do we ensure that we comply with legislation that applies to our local country of residence, but also if we're part of an international company, how do we ensure that we comply with the international context within which we operate in terms of policies and procedures as well, and again have smoother communication, set clear expectations, because that ensures that supports us in delivering service quality. So these are some of the things that we are going to be covering in much greater detail during Unit 3. We're also going to be talking about cultural differences as barriers to effective communication. This is where we are starting to look internally within ourselves, and we are going to be discussing our biases. We're going to be discussing stereotyping and also ethnocentrism, which is quite important for us to be aware of. The Unit 3 is very interesting because we're not only going to be looking at the external environment, the legislation, how culture plays a huge role in communication, but also how we can manage that effective communication. But also we're going to look at ourselves and the lenses through which we perceive culture, so that we can ensure that we are aware of our biases, that we are aware of whether we are stereotyping, because as managers it would be our responsibility to ensure we are not only effective in the way we do our jobs, but we are also role models, and we are encouraging others to be conscious of their own biases and to contribute to the creation of a global workforce, especially if you're working for an international company where not only government legislation is followed when it comes to culture, diversity and inclusion, but people actually feel they're part of a positive working environment. So let's have a look at what ethnocentrism really means. Again, I'm just giving you an example here, and during the sessions we are going to go into more detail, okay? So ethnocentrism is very much about believing that the people, customs and traditions of your own race or nationality are better than those of other races. This is how the Cambridge Dictionary defines ethnocentrism, and you may have had experiences with a professional or a person that demonstrated ethnocentrism in their approach to communication. It is important that we are aware of, again, our own biases and whether we have perhaps at times demonstrated ethnocentrism unconsciously without realizing it, because as people who are education managers and leaders within that field, as I previously mentioned, we should also be acting as role models and really role modeling the culture that we represent, and how to conduct communication effectively, and questioning our own biases, especially with everything that is happening in the world at the moment, with all the initiatives, all the movements that organizations are championing, how important it is to really create that inclusive and diverse working environment where everyone feels valued and everyone feels appreciated, irrespective of where they come from. And for this to be achieved, and especially as people who, as professionals who play a key role in establishing a culture within an organization, because we are responsible for the training, the educational initiatives, it is important to understand those concepts such as ethnocentrism, how that affects the workplace, how we could manage that if we actually come across people who demonstrate ethnocentrism. So during Unit 3, we are going to be looking at that as well. Also, we are going to discuss the differences between the Eastern and the Western business culture and etiquette, just so that you can get to know the different cultures, and you are going to be asked to bring some personal examples so that we could discuss some real life situations, as that would be quite useful in understanding how culture is shaping the way we communicate and the way we develop partnerships, the way we work together, as some cultures are very different in the way they do business compared to other cultures. And effective intercultural communication takes place when we have the awareness and the knowledge of all the cultures that are present within our organization, and how the attitude that they hold, for instance, what's acceptable in their culture, so that we are better prepared in managing expectations and communicating smoothly. And although usually in a multicultural working environment, people comply with the policies and procedures within the organization, as I previously mentioned, a lot of governments have introduced, I can give you as an example, key pieces of legislation to ensure people do not feel discriminated and all cultures are welcome. So eliminating biases and understanding how different cultures work is the topic of Unit 3. There will be an element of self-coaching as well, where you are going to be examining your own cultural assumptions and biases. There will be some self-awareness exercises where you will be asked to think about your own biases and assumptions, and although these are going to be some fun exercises, you are actually going to learn how to apply those with your own teams and within your own organization to create that culture of inclusion, that culture of smooth communication where different perspectives are welcome for the purpose of the thriving of the organization.